Today's guest is an expert in ghostwriting, publishing, and helping creatives turn their stories into successful books. I've personally watched him help people build incredible children's books, nonfiction, and fiction authors alike. He's the founder of Publishing Push, a company that's helped over 4,000 authors bring their big ideas to life. And his unique approach to ghostwriting is all about truly capturing someone's voice and turning it into a seamless, engaging story, a narrative that their audience can connect with. Throughout the episode, we talk about the ghostwriting process, the power of storytelling, and how aspiring authors can successfully navigate the world of self-publishing, hybrid publishing, or more traditional professional publishing. And he shares valuable insights on building your book in a way that will stand out in today's crowded market, the importance of hiring editing help, and how to craft a story that truly resonates. It's truly incredible seeing the impact that he has on people who want to become authors when they really realize their dreams. Please welcome to JKL, Patrick Walsh, aka the Publishing Guy. First off, just want to say thank you, Patrick, for taking the time to do this. It really means a lot when we're all trying to juggle schedules, you know?
Yeah, no, I'm really happy to be here. I'm excited. Thanks for inviting me on, Justin.
I always love to get right into the kind of meat of what people do in terms of their careers. You do work in a few different areas. The overall bubble tends to be publishing and writing and authors. One of the buzzwords that I've seen in some of your content that I see all over places like X right now and the internet is this idea of ghostwriting. It's also near Halloween time here. And thinking of the idea of ghost is such a great brand word. Like I've always thought it'd be cool to create any company that has the word ghost in it.
Yeah.
And just, I don't know, we're attracted to ghosts. So I think the term ghostwriting stands out, but I feel like people who see it, the majority probably don't even know what the heck it is when we get into the details a little bit. So could you define ghostwriting as you see it?
Yeah, sure. So I guess very briefly, how I see ghostwriting is understanding an individual and quickly figuring out, what it is that makes them unique or the way they communicate unique. And then essentially copying that and producing content, in the same style and tone as that person would create it, so that the audience, in effect, is none the wiser. And that audience, whether they are, Twitter, people on Twitter, Twitter followers, or they're YouTube subscribers, or they're reading your book, in effect, as far as they're concerned, it was written by, the individual whose name is, either on the Twitter bio or on the book. And of course, the actual art of ghostwriting, I suppose, goes a lot deeper. So, from our standpoint, when it comes to publishing, we've done a whole range of ghostwriting. So has this kind of, like you say, it's a very broad term, but, with some books, we write the entire thing. So we talk to the individual and we get a sense of their tone, their style, how they like to communicate, and their story. And then we sit down and we type it out, from start to finish. But then you also get this, and I sometimes feel like the line between ghostwriting and editorial can almost get blurred a little bit as well, because sometimes you almost do so much editorial work on a book that you end up, in effect, ghostwriting it. So you can kind of see the spectrum from one end to the other.
Right. So take us into that process a little bit. You said that you get to know their tone. I would assume that you're also asking questions like, does that look like a 1-hour interview? Are you meeting with this person a whole bunch of times? And granted, there may be different versions of this, but what would it look like in a typical ghostwriting partnership?
Yeah, so a typical ghostwriting partnership actually starts off digitally first. So these days, the huge advantage is that a lot of the people who approach us that we work with, they already have a lot of content online. So even if it's just a Twitter account and they've been tweeting for years, that immediately gives us an insight into, okay, here's how they communicate, here's the style, here's, accounts they follow, here's things that they repost. And that really gives us an amazing insight just right off the bat. So probably as time has gone on, when I started doing this over 10 years ago, it was a lot heavier in terms of, okay, let's sit down face to face, tell me about yourself. Let's talk to some of your friends and family, and let's really build a picture of who you are and what your story is. But now, with so much being online, it actually has made it easier for us to get that initial information. But the typical process is, so yeah, we do the online research, and then of course we do an initial call. So I'll give you an example. I did a call earlier this week, and we kind of cover two elements. So particularly the ghostwriting that we do for entrepreneurs, for business owners, they very much want to get straight into the business side of things. And they'll start saying, okay, this is what I've done. Here's the goal of the book. Here's what I think I can teach, etc. But actually, the goal of that call, particularly from my perspective, is to figure out a lot more about who they are as a person. So I try and get, I ask them personal stories, family stories. This lady in particular that I was talking to, in initial contact, she'd mentioned, there's a bit of a wild family story. And that was like this one little thread I got. And so immediately on the call, I started pulling on that thread. And it was, then there's all this other information that came out. And that actually is the fundamental part that we're going to use to build out that book, because the story was all about redemption. And that was kind of the thread I noticed that was running through a lot of even the business topics, but finding that personal story is going to make the whole thing so much more relatable. People are going to, invest in her book and her story. So that's really what we look for on that first call that we do with an author, is to, just figure out, tell us that, let's really get in there and hear more about who they are as a person. So that call, sometimes it'll be half an hour, sometimes it's a bit longer, like 45 minutes to an hour. And then from that, generally speaking, we can start to build a pretty good outline of, okay, here's where we're going to go. Here's what some of the chapters are going to look like. And then from that point forward, it's a case of we'll do another call, share with them that outline, and then we plot, okay, this is a chapter. We both like that being the first chapter. Let's plot the key points we're going to hit within that chapter. And then we'll kind of move on from there. And then normally between sort of 6 to 8 hour-long calls, we can then make our way through the rest of the book. And that, again, is just typical. That's for more of a business book, in effect. If people wanted to write more of a memoir, or they just had a much bigger book in mind, then it would take a little bit longer.
And I was a little bit curious about the type of book, because just yesterday, like less than 24 hours ago, I interviewed James Fell, who's a pretty popular Canadian author, and he wrote a successful fitness book and then wrote a self-help book that flopped. And it's called The Holy Shit Moment. I think it's actually still behind me, but it was actually a good book. But we got talking about sometimes you don't know what's going to work necessarily in the market, and then has gone to writing history that is now doing really well. And so
okay,
I was curious about exactly that with the hypothetical. Well, it's not a hypothetical, but the mystery person that we're referring to, like that example that you're sharing, what type of book that typically is. Is it that like how to, the idea being someone who can pick up this book and learn from it in terms of business?
Yeah, that's right. So typically it's a how to. The goal, so with the books that we tend to be creating for people, they have kind of a big goal that they want to hit for it. So this lady in particular, she works in venture capital. And so for her, she wants to attract more early stage startups, and founders to her. So basically her book is all about, here's, the way she put it was, okay, through my time in venture capital, if we get all of the people that I've invested in, she said there's 70%, roughly speaking, that they realize it's really hard, things don't go their way, and she's like, they give up and they just say, this isn't for me. And then she said you get the 30% who they realize, like, I like this, even if it doesn't go my way, I'm going to keep doing this until it works. And so she's kind of studied as much as she can, that 30%, and then tried to distill down the key lessons that she's learned from these people. Like, what is it that makes them stick around? How do they get through the tough moments? All those kind of things. So it's a book about that. And then, she's going to put it all into this book with the goal being, if it's framed in the right way, it will attract, founders and people that she'd like to work with. So it's kind of almost like a flag in the ground is how a lot of our clients view it. So it really depends a little bit just on their goal for the book. We do get people who come to us and say, I want this book to be a bestseller. And then when it's that approach, we then say, okay, we need to frame the book in the right way. So we really need to think about who the target audience is for this book. And we'll even go as far as doing like competitor analysis as well. So we'll say, okay, what other books are there that are similar to this? Are they doing well? We'll work out what are people searching for, what are people buying, and try and figure out how it should be positioned. So it depends on the goal that people have for the book. But that's kind of our approach, is if it's, okay. And sometimes you can have both, you can have a bestseller and it can attract the people that you're aiming to. But that's one of the things as well in those first calls that we do before ghostwriting, is it's really, tell me the goal you want to achieve from this, because what you want to achieve from your book is going to completely set the tone for how we approach this.
And it's interesting when we talk about ghostwriting, because the idea of being a ghost means we aren't talking about what books these are and things like that. And I'm assuming typically there's NDAs and stuff that keeps us from being able to share specific details about who people are. Yeah. But on the flip of success, if ghostwriting in your experience doesn't go well, given that you've been doing it 10 plus years, what are some things that happen when that partnership doesn't succeed?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Particularly in the early days of doing this, we certainly had more books that didn't go the way we'd hoped. And it wasn't because they were necessarily poorly written. I think from our perspective, we've always kind of had the writing down pat. That's kind of naturally why I gravitated toward this and how I built the team that I have. But the bit we kept missing for quite a few years was framing the books. And that's the bit we spent time trying to work out, and also spending a lot more time on the goal, what is the goal? But also I think what we've learned as well now is up front, we have a lot more conversations about, what to expect. So we'll say, okay, look, what are your expectations here? What are you trying to achieve? And really make sure that anybody who's coming to us, to go through this process understands that it's not, it's not a guaranteed success. There's never 100% guarantee we can offer. We can certainly guarantee, a great book that's well written, that's edited well, that has amazing cover. But once it goes out into the market, there's always that element of, let's see where it goes. But with more upfront, that's been the biggest lesson from that, is just setting expectations, getting clear on the goal, and having a lot more of those kind of difficult discussions up front. Because in the past, if we didn't have those and then it didn't go the way we'd hoped, then of course we were sort of having these difficult discussions after the fact, which is never, where you want to be.
No, for sure. But in the case of being a young business owner, what things did you lean on to keep going? Like you mentioned the VCs who fall into that 30% who kept going versus the 70% who bailed. In your case, I'm sure there were some tough times early on.
Yeah.
Why do you think you were able to keep going when maybe somebody else who starts this type of business just, it's like, I'm out of here after their first few failures?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me, to be honest, I'm just not a very good employee. So I just don't really like being employed. Mainly, I just really enjoy the freedom of running my own business. And so that's been always the thing that's kind of got me through even through difficult periods, is I just appreciate the freedom. I couldn't really imagine myself doing anything else. And the truth is, like, I actually enjoy the difficult periods in a weird kind of way. So I like the challenge. It's almost what gets me fired up. So I've had periods where I grow the business and it gets to a pretty good position and it's running smoothly. You know, I've got a good team in place. And those are weirdly the times where I go off the boil a little bit. So I'll, get a little bit comfortable. I start taking a little bit more time off. And then, things maybe a few processes need changing and, one advertising channel is not working as well as it did. And then that's when I kind of have to come back in and fix the problems. I suppose I've just always been a little bit that way, and that I need pressure. So growing up, I was quite a good tennis player was my thing, and I was always someone. Coaches would always get frustrated because they said you'll get ahead in a match, and then they said that you'll do exactly that. They were like, you kind of go off the boil a little bit, you get a bit complacent. But then they said, the counter to that is you'll be down 5-love. And then you just switch on and the pressure just forces you to focus. And they're like, you'll get through and you'll win the set. So, I think I've just always been a little bit that way. But also to me, with the business, I've got such a great team around me as well. I always have. And, in tough times, we're able to just sort of lean on each other and get through. So I think having a good support system within your business as well is hugely beneficial. Other people who are on your team and you say, look, this quarter isn't going particularly well, and they're kind of right there with you, like, okay, let's turn this around.
I've heard that term when you have your foot on someone's throat and you let them up off the mat, or you can't kind of finish them off in a sporting event, I think it's called a sympathetic competitor. And I definitely have that in the sport of golf. Like every time that I get ahead in golf before, or even playing video games as a kid, it's like, I get up on someone, then it's like you always let them back. It's almost like it's more fun when there's some tension that's a little more equal. And I guess, hey, that's the case of any great story of the hero's journey, right? Like if everything's easy, who the heck's going to want to pay attention? And that's maybe our internal version of that. It's interesting you bring up sport in general, because I think that's just another connection to entrepreneurship. Like if you became a really good tennis player, then you must have some habits and skills that you've transferred over to business. Do you find that that's the case with anything in particular?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's huge. It has a huge crossover. So I've had a mentor for a while. His name is Douglas. He's from Canada originally, and when I first met him, and I was talking about hiring. And he said to me, he was like, I try if I can. He's like, I can't always, but I always try and hire people who have some form of sporting background, particularly if they have competed at a high level, anywhere they've excelled in sport. He said, I look for. And I hadn't really thought about it in that way before, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that sport teaches you all of the things you need really to succeed in this. If you in the business arena, you need to be resilient, right? So not every match is going to go your way. I think tennis is good for that in particular because, you lose more than you win in tennis. So you just have to keep coming back, after those losses. So, it teaches you that resilience of just not giving up, and things aren't always going to go your way. And in sport, things are unpredictable. You can go out there fully prepared with the right game plan, and then something different, or, you can't quite put it, together as you'd hoped. But what you learn to do, especially through sport at a high level, is you learn to win even when you're not having a good day. Like, you learn to find a way to get the outcome, even when it's like, I didn't sleep well, I'm not feeling great today. I wasn't expecting this opponent in the first round, whatever it may be. You just go, okay, well, I think what one of my early tennis coaches said to me, I remember coming off a match, and I had all the excuses. I was like, I wasn't expecting that, and that line call and this. And he just said, he was like, look, no one's going to remember the excuses. He said, they're just going to remember who won and who lost, right? And he said that at the end of the day, he was like, maybe you have had a rough day or whatever it may be, but he's like, nobody cares. They're just going to ask, did you win or did you lose? Like, that's all. So, I think a lot of that just taught me to just, you just got to get on with it, find a way to get the result, however you can.
I love that sentiment. I had a similar coach that I can remember back to when I was probably 16 years old, who, playing American football in my case, I got beat a couple times in a row in one game, came off similarly frustrated. And it's nice to be able to tell this story because he passed shortly thereafter, but, to kind of as a tribute, rest in peace sort of thing, as just to... Yeah. To say that I remember what he said to me to this day clearly, which is 25 years later, which is wild, saying that no one's going to remember those things that happened. And every single person who ends up succeeding in this sport will have had a lot of those things happen. But the ones who stick around and keep going are the ones that you're going to see at the finish line, playing university, playing professional, stuff like that. And that stuck with me. I've used that kind of just in my subconscious almost sometimes in so many situations. So I really definitely appreciate that. We could probably do a whole episode on the overlap of sport and business. To stick with the business stuff for a second. Yeah, it'd be easy to do for sure. To stick with the business stuff for a second, you've mentioned the team a few times. How big is the team? Like, and what roles do people play for those who don't know what it would be like to build your own publishing company?
Yeah, sure. So the team at the moment is 7 people, so 7 full-time. That includes myself. We've been through a few iterations. So probably one of the mistakes I made early on was kind of over hiring, and we got a little bit bloated as soon as we saw a lot of growth. But in terms of the roles that people play, so with our publishing company, being that it's not a traditional publisher, so of course it's professional, it's paid for, ghostwriting and publishing. So the roles are a little bit different. The way I have it set up is that we have 2 publishing consultants, as I call them, and they do our sales in effect. But the reason I call them publishing consultants is really when people come to us, they're at different stages of the process. They've never done this before. And so really what they need, is to sit down with someone and say, okay, help, what do I do? I've either got this idea, is it a good idea? What should I do with it? Or I've kind of half written a few things and I've got a few chapters, but then it never went any further. And what do you think? What should I do next? Or sometimes we get people that are like, I think I've finished my book. What should I do with this now? So they really sit down and they consult with them and they say, look, here's the options. You can have you can have a ghostwriter, or we can edit it, or we can just do the publishing, whatever you need. And so they'll really build it out for them. And figure out, again, what do you want to do with this book? What's the goal? And also just what's the goal for them as an author? Are you doing this book as kind of a one-off to promote a business or to promote consulting, or do you want to become a career author? Like, where do you want to go? And then from that point on, we have project managers. So they're more technical. These are people from a publishing house background. So they would have worked at a publishing house most of the time, not always, but they really understand the technicalities of, how to format and typeset a book properly, what a good cover should look like, how a blurb should be structured. So they really understand crafting the book is how I determine it. We have a few other people ancillary to this, of course, like accountants and, marketing agency and that type of thing. But that's really the core team is 4 project managers and then the 2 publishing consultants. And then on top of that, of course, we have all the ghostwriters, we have the editors, the cover designers. So they're all freelancers. Some of them pretty much work with us exclusively now. So we have about 30 different freelancers that we use, from ghostwriters to cover designers, editors, etc. So, but quite a few of them are pretty much, they only work with us.
Yeah, but it's quite I was about to say big ship, but then when you think of something like Amazon or something, it's massive, gigantic ships, but it's a big enough thing to kind of move around and make sure it's running properly. And it was interesting that you mentioned the idea of hiring so quickly as a mistake the first time, because I personally, short of a couple VA situations and internships, haven't hired in this business, and don't know when that will come to be. But so many entrepreneurs that I've interviewed have shared that exact idea, that they hired too quickly and that their team, instead of 7, was maybe 13, and now they're down to 7, and they're like, now they're in a sweet spot. And I don't know if it's something that people need to go through firsthand. There's obviously no real true manual that any one of us can follow clearly, but I definitely have heard that story a bunch of times.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Yeah, that's good. You've heard it a few times. That makes you feel a bit better. I think it was just kind of, we got to a certain level of growth, and things are going quickly. And I thought, okay, great. And I kind of threw people at the growth and at the problem, because as we took on all of these projects, we suddenly realized, oh my God, so the business grew at one point. I think we were doing, like, on average, we'd have about 50 or 60 projects on the go. Then we hit 80, then we hit like 100, and then suddenly it was like 120. And I remember it so vividly, thinking, we need people to solve this. But what we ended up doing was, so it's a nice mix of, we have hired more since, our very early beginnings. It was just me and 2 other people. But we've just improved our efficiency, with the process. The process is so much more efficient now. A lot more things are automated. Contact with the author is more streamlined. Originally we kind of had it split across multiple systems. We had our project management system, then, emails to the authors, and now it's just all in one thing. So the solution for us, was just a bit more process.
That's a lot of business to be doing. So that's awesome. Kudos to you. And in terms of gaining that business, I know that you've shared tricks on how to grow your Twitter following and Twitter marketing. You've created content around Pinterest, and you've shared some ideas and insights on how to build LinkedIn. And I know that you're building your own YouTube channel as well. Maybe you want to pick one of those, but in terms of talking about the idea of marketing a business, which is obviously a strength of yours, that the business is coming in for, again, those people who are like, how do you end up getting 80, 90, 120 clients on the go at a given time? What is at least what you've seen work?
Yeah, absolutely. So the YouTube thing is new for me. That was, I noticed every now and again, friends would come to me and they'd be like, Patrick, I want to improve the marketing for this, or I'm launching this. How should I do it? And it was one of my friends who said to me, he was like, every time you talk about marketing, he's like, I get my notes app out and I start writing it down. And I was like, oh, right. I was like, interesting. That was when I thought, oh, you know what? Let's just put some of this stuff on YouTube. I'd wanted to do that for a while. seems to have a pretty good response so far, and I'm enjoying it. But in terms of marketing, I think if I go back to when I first started the business, so yeah, making this relevant to people who either, you don't have much of a budget, you're just getting started, you're like, how can I just get some clients? So I started this journey on Twitter 10, 12 years ago or something like that. And all I would do was just, post about the journey, which still applies today. So just sharing insights, the ups and the downs. If anything, I would say, I wish I'd been more vulnerable about the good and the bad. When I first started kind of sharing my journey to market myself and to market Publishing Push, I kind of only focused on the wins and the good and the ups. And I always thought, if I share some of the bad things, the stuff that's gone wrong, that's not going to be good marketing. People aren't going to work with me. But I've since learned the opposite, to share things that haven't gone so well and to be more vulnerable. So that process still works today. And I think finding those channels where they're either, they're cheap or they're free in effect, is a great place to start out and to really just understand them. And the other thing is, if you're just getting going with marketing on Twitter, it would be to really engage and to treat it as like conversations, right? So treat it as, I'm going to interact with this person's content and build a relationship with them. Again, that was a mistake I made when I was much younger, as I made it a bit too much of a one-way street here's what I'm doing, here's what I'm selling. And I've learned, a much better way to do that is make it more of a two-way street. So yeah, I think, right now as well, if someone is looking to promote a business or a service, I really think that Twitter is kind of having a bit of a renaissance. I know, honestly, I left it alone for a couple of years or so, and then got back into it when, just a few people were talking about the results they were getting. And I thought, God, we do have a big following on there. We should really use it more, engage more, and get back into it. So yeah, I think that one is phenomenal. LinkedIn is another amazing opportunity at the moment. A lot more kind of organic reach available there. And I think as well with LinkedIn in particular, not many people have kind of mastered LinkedIn. So Twitter, there's a lot of people who really understand, if I post these types of content, I know it's going to work. But on LinkedIn, it's still, I would say, it's a bit like bringing a knife to a gunfight, right? So if you understand those principles that capture attention on Twitter, you can do very well on LinkedIn as well. So yeah, and I'm just a big fan of any of those platforms where you can cold message people, direct message people. Like when I started this, all I did, I would just sit there and just DM people, and cold email as well as the other thing I still think is massively underrated in marketing. You can it's amazing the people you can get a response from. So like I cold emailed Andrew Wilkinson, who runs like Tiny. I think they got listed on the Canadian Stock Exchange. And he replied. We cold DM like Cody Sanchez the other day about a project, and she replied. It still blows my mind sometimes the people you can access with a cold email or a cold DM. So yeah, I would say to anybody young, just starting out, wanting to promote something, just get out there and you'll be amazed the people that you might get a response from.
And when in that case, when you're emailing Andrew or Cody or any of the others, are you just trying to continue to build your network and build a relationship as opposed to pitching someone who's already got that big of a brand?
Yeah, so it depends on the situation. Like with Cody in particular, we're doing the ghostwriting. We've slowly been able to kind of trade up and up and up. So as we've worked with certain people, then other people have got interested in, and now we've had some success, we can kind of message other people. So our approach a little bit now is we're almost sitting there and saying, like, who would we really like to work with? We're like, okay, if there was someone that we could help to write a book, like, who would we be super excited to work with? And so that's been the approach we've been doing there. Like Andrew Wilkinson, for example, is someone that I've just listened to him a lot on MFM. I don't know if you listen to that podcast. And every time I'm like, oh, these episodes are brilliant, like with Andrew. So that was why we reached out. And the same with Cody. Like I was like, I just really like a newsletter, and so we reached out. And that's really the main, kind of reason at the moment. And I think that's the most authentic way to reach out to people is when you're, scrolling through Twitter, excuse me, if you really like their content, you're just like, oh, this is cool, and for us, it's just a case of, this is great content. Have you ever thought about a book or something? And it's not coming from a really salesy perspective. It's just a case of, if you were thinking about this, we'd love to work with you and come up with something. So yeah, but the biggest is, I guess, being able to offer those people something, is the key, whatever it may be, and I would just pay attention to kind of, if you listen to them on a podcast or they're in their content, if you can find something like, oh, they're struggling with this, like I can solve that problem for them. And not doing it in a way of like, I'll solve that problem for you if you do something for me. It's just a case of like, hey, I'll solve that problem for you.
Yeah. That's a really powerful concept that I feel like brings a lot of value to people, even more than maybe you realize, because when you're first starting to network, you're first starting to really build your social media, the idea of doing that and how to do it in the best way possible is often something that people struggle through. So I really appreciate you sharing that. The version for podcasting, for me, a lot of people will look at the archives of our episodes and say, how did you get so-and-so? How did you get so-and-so? How did you get so-and-so? The interesting thing is, it was really never plotted out or planned. It came through pretty natural marketing and networking over time. But also in podcasting land, what's interesting is it's similar to like the hip hop industry, where you collaborate with people earlier on in our journeys, and later on people know their brands and see the episodes from before. And it's just, again, just being good people, creating and supporting with somewhat like-minded individuals, I guess, and just being a good person. It goes a long way. When it comes to writing, naturally, writing is an important part of building a business like this. Was writing something that you were always interested in, or did you go into this type of business because you thought it was a good business decision?
Yeah, so I fell into this business completely by accident. So yeah, it definitely wasn't something that I plotted out to do. And writing as well. So writing didn't really come that naturally to me. I was always quite a long-winded person when it came to writing. So people would be like, oh man, Patrick, this thing you've written, you could have said this in one page and you turned it into like a 10-page epic, So I was I've always enjoyed it, but I wouldn't say it was like necessarily my natural, something I was naturally just got from day dot. So the way I fell into it was I did a law degree here in the UK, and kind of coming to the end of that was not enjoying it as much as I had expected. I liked some parts of it, but then I worked in a law firm for a little while, and I just thought this is not for me. And then purely by coincidence, what kicked off kind of the writing side of things is I quit the job at the law firm and just didn't have a job. And a friend said to me, they want extras for this movie. It's just like a low budget movie. They just need tall people to play soldiers. I think they're paying like £100 a day or whatever. You just basically need to be tall. I was like, great, sign me up. So I went down there, got selected. I was tall enough. That was the only criteria I needed. And off I go. And it turns out it wasn't a low budget film. It was actually the first Marvel movie the Captain America movies. And so there I am on set, and meeting lots of people who are in the film industry. And the way it went was there were these two other guys who were also doing extras work just to fill in. But they were producers, they were writers, and they were like, "Oh, we're working on a movie." And they were like, "What's your background?" And we got talking. And they were having trouble with contracts. And I said, I said, "No problem. I can help you with the contracts." I literally just offered. I didn't, charge any money for it. I said, "Yeah, just like bring them on set the next few days, and at lunch, I'll just have a look and I'll check them for you." And then that was how it started. And then they sort of said, actually, they were like, "You know what? We can use some help with this thing." And so I got involved with them. And we made like this low budget indie movie that it never went anywhere, and it wasn't very good, but it was kind of like my first little foray into entrepreneurship and into writing at the same time. Although I didn't really realize it, like at the time, that's kind of what it was going to set me up for. And then, so I grew up in Canada originally. And so after this, I thought, you know what, I want to go back to Canada for a little while. Been in the UK for a long time. So I went to Toronto, took the first job I could find when I got there. And that was at a company called Trend Hunter in Toronto. What they did was they were like a massive online publisher of content. And the job I got there was writing up these like trend reports. And so I remember like the first day in the office there, and I thought, like I'm not bad at writing. And I created like one of the little trend reports. They just like ripped it to shreds immediately. And I was like, oh God, okay. And so there I spent like 3 or 4 months, just every day you'd go in, you'd write like 10 articles, they'd rip them to shreds, you'd write 10 more. And it was just kind of this like real intense process, but you just got better and better every day. You got better at spotting a good headline, and then the ones that were good enough would end up on the site. Initially I'd maybe get one, like first week, and maybe get one by the end of the week. And then you start seeing a few more kind of go through the editorial process and get approved. And so that was kind of where I first, got better at this. And then when I came back to the UK, I was just doing like a few bits of consulting, again, just like marketing, writing, and then started getting jobs working with publishers. So either helping them with extra writing or with marketing or just kind of anything, that they needed extra. And that's when I started building Publishing Push. Originally, we were kind of this outsourced element to publishing houses where they would come to us with sort of these specific requests. And then over time built it out to be, more independent and helping people, construct an entire book. But that's really it. So yeah, I kind of fell into publishing. It wasn't something that I set out, that I thought. In fact, a lot of people when I first started it were like, "Don't do publishing, you won't make any money." And writing as well, people were kind of a bit like, "Writing, like, I don't know, you're a bit long-winded, mate. But I'm not sure that's for you." But yeah, so I've invested a lot of time just to kind of get better at these things.
There are very much embedded values and life lessons and wisdom in those stories. When it comes to developing that skill of writing and then ripping things to shreds, I'm sure you've seen, I know in your bios, it tends to say that you've helped 4,000 plus authors help them write and publish books. You've seen a lot of writing. When you see things that people can improve on, if you're tending to help people write better, what are those kind of go-to things that you think that people need to work on typically?
So yeah, I know. Yeah, I think we've helped around 4,000. I added it all up because we buy all these ISBNs the other day, and I was like, God, I can't believe it's been that many people. But I suppose it's been 10, 11 years, so it's kind of added up pretty fast. In terms of like common writing mistakes, I would say probably the most common thing we see is like people lose their way. So they kind of start out with, I'm going to write a book about X and I'm going to tell, it's kind of like the arc of the story. By the end of this book, they'll know how to promote themselves on Twitter. And then often as you read the books, they they wander, and then they end up finishing on a completely different place. You're like, wait a minute, I thought the book was about this. So that's kind of one of the common things we see. And that's where an outline really helps. So we always say to people, like, when you're writing, like, outline what are the key things you want to hit, and also have the goal at the end of the book, right? So have that final thing that someone should learn by the end of this book, and keep that in your mind, the whole time when you're going through it, so you don't kind of lose your way. In terms of like other things that we see is long-winded. So people take, they write something that's like 150,000 words. No word of a lie. We've had books come through where it's like a 200,000 word book. And we just go, this is way too long. What are you doing? And that probably helps because, I used to be that guy. So I'm quite qualified to solve that problem. And it's just a case of being, ruthless with the editing process. I think like that's the skill I've learned over the years. Anytime I write something is just, I always say, let it breathe for like a good 2 or 3 days. Short form stuff, you can leave it a few hours or a day or whatever. But if it's something a bit longer, leave it a longer period of time, and then you'll come back to it, and you'll be able to cut so much of it, and really cut it down to just every single line. I look at it as every single line has to fight for a reason to be there. If it's not communicating the message clearly, or it's not providing value in some way, just get rid of it. And then I kind of go even further where it's every single word has to fight for a reason to be there. So that's kind of, those I would say are 2 of the most common problems. I think it's also people just, as I said a bit earlier, being a bit afraid to be vulnerable and to share personal stories. And because as I've always said, is those that get really personal, they always do the best. Those are always the best books, even if they're not the most well-written books. I've seen some books where they've kind of said, what, I don't want to edit it too much. I just want to tell it, my way. If they're being really vulnerable, those books do well.
How do you feel about the differences between, or I guess if someone's listening to this and they're thinking of being an author and they have ideas for children's books, so more like pictures and maybe there's 25 words, let alone 200,000, how does this process differ for someone who is listening, but they're less in that how-to business space that I think we're kind of speaking through so far? How does that person get help from you? And I guess, are there differences?
Yeah. So there's, big differences. With children's books, of course, the emphasis is always on the illustrations, is really where the emphasis lies when we're doing children's books. And children's books are so much fun. We love doing children's books because illustrators are just such talented people. And anytime we get to work with illustrators, just the creations that they come up with, it's always amazing. But if someone is kind of approaching the children's book and wanting to create a children's book, I always say to think about how you're going to tell the story visually. So you can almost approach a children's book just with the visual elements first, without really thinking about, the words too much. Of course, when it comes to that and your story and everything, then, depending on the result you're going for, you either want, some rhyming within the words or, depending on the age group, the amount of words will vary. But that's kind of my approach. And then I always say to people as well is to sort of test it out as much as they can with a children's book, because children will give you really honest feedback as well. So which is the great thing. Adults tend to, it's really funny because it's like adults will come to us and they'll say, I let, 10 of my friends read it. They said my book was amazing. And we're always like, well, they're probably being nice, they're being polite. And whereas if like my daughter, if I'm reading her a book and it's boring, she's just like, this is boring. Like, they'll just tell you straight away that, like, oh, that's a bit rubbish. I didn't enjoy that. Let's not read that book again, So kids, when you have, either a story in mind or that type of thing, they are the best consumer feedback you can get.
Yeah, I have a quick story about that. My daughter the other day said, your podcast is boring. You should make YouTube videos.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, you're 10, so relax.
Yeah, exactly.
But that made me think of a really good marketing tactic. If I were or when I write a children's book, I would love to go create an awesome YouTube video, and I just go into kindergarten classes and read the first prototype.
Yeah, definitely. That would be the way to do it. Then you'd know instantly if you had a hit or not.
and what to change. I love the overlap. Filmmaking's a big hobby, more so interest of mine. I've been on film sets myself probably 30, 40 times as well. And the overlaps between writing a good book sound very similar to creating a good film or movie, even if it's a 40-second reel or short, as well as a 10-minute YouTube video or a 3-hour documentary. That ability to have the through line and tell the overall story and stay on task, I suppose, in terms of your script. One of the things that I feel like for listeners tuning into this, you mentioned Cody Sanchez as well as Andrew Wilkinson. And I think of someone like Jimmy Fallon writing a children's book. And for those who are earlier on in their journey, thinking, I also have a bunch of book ideas. Should I completely self-publish? Should I work with someone like yourself? Should I hold out for that $100,000 advance? Like the people listening to that who don't have brands yet, is the advice that you give people like that?
Yeah, sure. So I think the easy way to start with this advice is that if you have a big following, then you can look at the traditional route if you want. Personally, I think professional publishing, self-publishing is a much better option for a number of reasons. And if you're just starting out, you're just getting going, it's going to depend on budget. So if you just want to get your first book out there, then of course, and you don't have much of a budget, then self-publishing now is a great way to go. There's a load of tools you can use. Of course, Amazon KDP, but there's things like Ingram Sparks, and there's ways that you can create a cover, etc. So you can do it on a fairly small budget if you have the time to invest and dig into it. The people that we work with, they very much are, they're time poor. They just need the book created. They have a very specific idea of why they want the book. And they want someone, they don't even have time to write it themselves. They just say, look, I've got this idea and I've got a story to tell, but I haven't got the time to sit down and write it. So I'd like you to create it. And also they want to get off, get off to a great start, right? They don't want to kind of figure out, I self-published, but I thought this cover would be good, but it didn't work well. And then that flopped. And now, let me try another one. They just want to say, can you just create a book that's going to do well for me? So you've tried and tested it for 10 years. What, works well. And I think, when it comes to publishing industry has changed a lot, the traditional deals are not what they used to be. And I really think no matter who you are, whether you have a big audience or not, I think professional or self-publishing, is the way to go. The caveat being if you are, a good example being like Ali Abdul, that YouTuber, has writing a book at the moment. he's going to get treated like royalty at Penguin because he has such a big audience. So for those people, it's not a bad way to go. But we've had authors who in the early days, we used to do a lot more marketing for authors. Now we do marketing for authors, but only if they publish with us. Back then people used to come to us and say, can you help promote my book? And what always shocked me was the amount of authors that would come to us and they would say, I've got this book, can you help market it? And I'd say, okay, sure, tell me a bit about it. And I'd look and go, oh, you're published by sometimes massive publishers like Simon and Schuster or Penguin. And I was like, what's happened here? And they would get published. They'd spend years getting this traditional deal. Oh yes, I finally got this deal. The book's been released. Brilliant. And then in this gentleman, the one in particular always comes to mind is they'd had a bit of a reshuffle in the marketing department. He was then saying, oh, I don't know who's responsible for my book. I keep trying to get hold of them and I can't get hold of everyone. And then his first book had done really well. And then his second book was, it was going to flop completely. And he's panicking because he goes, if this one flops, I'm never going to get another deal because then my second book has flopped and, that's it. So, and then they would come and spend money with us to promote their book that then the publisher was cashing in on anyway. So, it just wasn't a good deal. I mean, that's largely the reason we ended up creating Publishing Push was we said, we looked at traditional publishing and it was like, this is really broken. It takes years. It's not a great deal for most authors. There's a select few where it works, but for a lot of the others, it doesn't. And then there are a lot of these hybrids that popped up where they said, pay us to publish a book, but we're also going to take the same royalty as a traditional publisher. And, we were just like, oh, that's an awful deal. So that's when we created, this kind of professional model where we said, look, pay us and we'll create your book, but you own the book, you own all the royalties. Like we won't take any of that. So yeah, that's kind of how it all came into being and kind of my thoughts on self-publishing and professional.
How did you go about rescuing the marketing for that person?
That was quite a long time ago. We focused very heavily on reviews for that one. As I remember. So he was struggling a lot to get reviews. What they'd done for his first book, and we don't do this as much anymore. We do it for some books, but not to the same degree we used to. But it's where you'd have these print proofs. So before the book was even available to the public, we would send out review copies to book reviewers. And this is for a fiction book. It was like a horror novel. Wish I could remember the name right now, but so it was a horror novel. So we would target very specifically horror reviewers who had, big followings, big Twitter accounts, blogs, there's a lot more kind of about the blogs that they had at the time and pitch them on why they should, read the book. The reason we used to use that tactic was book reviewers then were already getting inundated with being sent so many books, they sort of lose track. So we used to always send it to them, ideally before the public release. Obviously with his book, we couldn't do it in that instance. It kind of put us on the back foot. But luckily his first book was pretty much a bestseller. So just them getting, a free book from him was kind of enough for them to be like, oh, okay, yeah, his first book was a bestseller. That's fine. We'll take a look at that. So yeah, it was a lot of that. Twitter, again, we've always been huge fans of Twitter for authors, just because, that's where writers and readers, tend to congregate there. So yeah, and then I think like running ads as well was something else we did then, even sort of trying to buy like little ad spots on horror like blogs and things like that was what we did for him.
Yeah, I get the books sent in the mail from people wanting to come on the podcast, which is a nice gesture. I appreciate it. I mean, to me, it's win-win. They're also sharing an hour of their time to create some awesome content and, get to read a book, and I like reading. So as long as it's a guest that makes sense for the show, that's definitely something that's helpful. When one thing that I've been complimented on this show is the posts that we create after the episodes on the blog. And I've found through SEO and Google Analytics that people actually read some of them. So I'm kind of doubling down on that, even though it's more typically a gesture to the guest. But that way they can kind of share the post and that stuff. And so one of the portions of that is always like a, Patrick's 8 points to blank or something along those lines. And I can pull from the majority of the episode, but I'd like to ask if we did say things to keep in mind when you're trying to publish your first book. Is there anything that you would add to kind of round out those bullet points?
Yeah, so things to keep in mind. It kind of depends on the route that you're going. So if you're going to self-publish and you're going to do it all yourself, a thing I would say to keep in mind is editing, number one. So sometimes if people will try and go self-publish and they want to do it without spending too much money, they'll skip the editing part of things. And I would say if you're going to do it yourself and you're going to do it on the smallest amount of money you can, is proofread. Pay for proofreading, like professional proofreading, because no matter how good the book is, we just know from kind of reader feedback that if the editing is poor, then people switch off. I think what happens is readers go, this person hasn't invested that much time in creating this book. So, why should I invest my time in reading the book? It just kind of doesn't, present really well. We tend to find people will kind of maybe forgive a bit of a poorly designed cover, or, if they get a good recommendation from someone. So that's kind of one thing I'd say to bear in mind. I would also say anyone that you do work with in the process is really kind of check them out. Especially if you're going, that's why a lot of people come to us, as all our freelancers are vetted, and ultimately we're responsible. If a freelancer walked out on a project, well, we have to still finish the project. That's our problem, not their problem. And we hear a lot of stories where, again, people try and find these freelancers online and they try and do it on the cheap, and then a freelancer kind of disappears on them halfway through editing. They've paid them all the money. And, so those are a couple of things, is just be really careful about who you choose to work with, and definitely invest in editing, proofreading, that type of thing. Even if you just have a friend who's amazing at English or whatever it may be, pay them, just pay someone, double check it. It's really worth it. And I think, and then points, professional publishing, if you have the money to go the professional route, is again to invest in the creation of that book. It can be such a phenomenal tool for attracting people, for growing a business, for kind of sharing your story. And I think the thing we find is that, and maybe this is a good point for people, is most of the people that come to us, they say, even some really successful people, they go, I don't know if I have any business writing a book. They're like, I don't know if I should really write a book. Do I have stuff that would be interesting to other people? And so many times we see that people kind of have this imposter syndrome of am I good enough to be writing a book and sharing it? And, every time we dig in and we start talking to people, we always find the most incredible stories, the most amazing stories, things where we go, oh, wow. In the office, we'll be like, oh, could you believe, we were talking to John last week and I can't believe he achieved that. That's amazing. So there's always stuff in these stories that are incredible. And most importantly, that will help other people. Two of the books we published recently that stand out. So one is by a lady called Rebecca House. Her book's Police to Paranoia. And she wrote about this mental health breakdown she had as a police officer. And it's a really vulnerable book. She shared so much in this book, but the response has been absolutely amazing to this book. It's helped so many people who are struggling, with mental health, and it's been phenomenal. So she's had a great result because it's become a bestseller, and she's getting lots of opportunities coming her way. But it's also been so helpful for so many people who've read it. Sorry if you can hear maybe the dog. The dog's dreaming underneath my desk at the moment. So yeah, that's what I would say is people should just believe in their story.
It's writing.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. And I want to ask one other thing that's kind of on the bullet form type stuff. And then I have a follow-up question that's a little more heartfelt that connects to that. But I just want to make sure, because this kind of point can probably gloss over somewhat quickly, I guess. And that's just, how do you think about category design and niche when someone wants to write a book? Because one thing to write a book about business or about mental health, and then it's a complete other thing to go super deep and drill down before someone goes and spends time creating their first 50,000 words.
Yeah.
How do you recommend first-time authors think about that?
Yeah, so I have a rule with this, like a really specific rule when it comes to this, is people come to us all the time and they say, they use this term where they say, I'm going to genre bust. And anytime I hear that term, I just think, I'm like, don't do that. And the reason is because when it comes to promoting a book, the genre is really just a sales channel. So it's literally just, where is it going to go in the bookshop? Are they going to put it in business, self-help? And when people have this genre busting book, like you have a marketing problem right off the bat, because bookshops don't know where it goes, on the shelves. So what I always say to people is, I'm like, have a main genre. So we have this, business, self-help, whatever it may be. And then of course we'll have, the subgenres, and we'll get like really specific on who the book is for. So, if with Rebecca's, it was for, like mental health, like even more specifically for, serving police officers. So that was kind of the niche really who were going to connect with that book 100%. But they would most likely share it with friends who'd struggled with mental health and that type of thing, because they would get value from it as well. But yeah, so those are like my two approaches. I'm like, on the top end, make sure your genre is clear and, for lack of a better term, boring. Like, just follow the principles of make sure you've got that genre that everybody just knows where it's going to go in a bookshop. And then have that real specific niche of, or another one was a lady who had tried to commit suicide, and then she'd got better. She took up running, and she ran like 10 marathons in over 10 days. And again, so that was very specifically kind of it was like for runners, but then like runners who'd used it as a way to improve their mental health. So it had this real specific niche, but at the same time, it fell into kind of like that self-help, category. So yeah, that's kind of my approach to that.
When you mentioned the idea of some people not knowing if they have a book in them, I've interviewed so many authors. I have a traditional background in creating written content because I did a master's and stuff like that. Although not in the bad way, like I wrote about Harry Potter and things. So I don't think it'd be the super boring essay type writing. However, I was extremely long-winded before. I'm a recovering long-winded writer as well. There's been a lot of personal things, like the painting that sits behind me with every episode I do has the ashes of both my younger brothers in it. And my dad made it as a tribute.
Wow.
And it's something that I can look at every time I go to record an episode. And like the movie My Girl, I grew up in a funeral home. And a lot of times when people hear that, they want to have me on their podcast to talk about grief for an hour. I work in jails and hospitals and addictions facilities, coaching youth on life skills and figuring out what pathway they want to take after they get out of serving like a 7-year homicide charge.
Wow.
Our daughter, we went to court and fought to just be able to adopt her, because Child Protective Services told us that we weren't going to be able to adopt her after they had already told us that we could. I could go on in terms of kind of some of those like micro stories, but the point I say is that people ask me all the time, why haven't you written a book yet? And I'm like, because I don't want to write the book that's just a business card.
Yeah.
However, at that point, it was probably more of like my own imposter syndrome, to use a cliche term, because I realize now maybe I should just try and write 10 books as opposed to worrying about it. But at some point I have to start with the first. And so I think that at one point in our DMs, when we first started talking about coming on the show, I had joked about treating it like a consult, but it's not even really joking. It's like, I feel like if you and I sat down to make a YouTube video that maybe helps your business or what have you, like with a whiteboard, that mind map would look pretty crazy pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But when people have a lot of ideas, how do you help them decide what the hell to start with when they actually have the opposite problem?
Yeah, that wow. I mean, yeah, you've been through an awful lot in your life. So yeah, that's a lot that you've been through and kind of come out the other side of some very challenging stuff to deal with. When it comes to getting to the core idea, it is definitely, like you say, it's just asking, a lot of questions, excuse me, and to a degree, like mind mapping. So kind of what I try and do is I try and figure out if there's like a pattern within the story. So that's one approach. So it might be that, a good example I keep referring to, but like this lady that I spoke to earlier in the week. And so she'd kind of mentioned personal stories. She'd mentioned work stories, business. But the thing that kept coming up was like this idea of going full circle. So, this kind of like recurring element, the redemption element, people getting a second chance, people taking that second chance. And that was then the theme that came out for the book. So I said, at first look, I was like, all of these stories, they look very disparate, but actually there is a theme that runs through them all. There's something that ties them all together. So, that was one approach. So I said the book could be, its central theme could be redemption. And so, to take your example is you have, what you do for work. So helping people, I guess, with a fresh start, right? So it's kind of, they've served their sentence and they're coming out and they're trying to figure out, what do I do? What next? How do I take this first step? And the podcast is of course about to keep on learning, but also how do you take that very first step in something? So, a book for yourself would maybe be something around that kind of like that first step you take. And it doesn't have to be, the very first step, literally. It could be, for example, like, you mentioned your brother's passing away. It can then be that first step after something very traumatic has happened or something very difficult has happened. For example, like the young children, who've been through prison for whatever reason, is that, okay, something terrible has happened, something difficult has happened, we've been through something, but now we're taking that first step to hopefully start a fresh journey, start fresh. So it's just kind of like a very quick, playing around with that idea. And then you would find that central theme of a fresh start after something has happened. The other way is sometimes, we talk to people and we say, actually, that there is 2 books here, or there's 3 books here, and you pick up on some where you say, these all fit together really nicely. This story over here, I think would be better as a book on its own. And going back to what I said about how sometimes we get these huge, like 200,000 word books, that's often what's happened. They've kind of actually got 2 books. They're just try to cram them all in one.
Yeah. And in my case, I'd love to, even if it's just super quick and it is completely self-published, doesn't really matter, but there's 1,000 of them out there, but how to podcast. But I really want to put my own input into that. And whether that's just a piece that exists and two people really benefit from it, or it does find some success, doesn't matter. It's still on the to-do list, right? Like I think it'd bring value. And so it's a fun challenge to have. And that would require like a full hour of talking through ideas and being able to give fuller context. But I just want to give you a pat on the back, because it's not that anybody else has done things poorly, but I've been approached probably 4 times, the most reputable by Tucker Max's team, in terms of, hey, let us help you write your first book. Like, we know you don't have a book out there yet. Let us write your first. A few different sales calls with people. I'd say like this is the first time where I've felt maybe it does make sense to work with a team to do this. And there's, many reasons for that are out of either of our control, like timing. But I think the way that you and your business are going about it is the right way. So I just appreciate it.
Oh, thanks. No, I really appreciate that, Justin. I think the thing for us is like what I've always enjoyed the most about what I do is hearing the stories that people tell me. People like have always asked, they're like, what do you enjoy the most about publishing Push? Is it writing the books? Is it when you publish the books? And I've always said what I enjoy the most is like those first phone calls sometimes with people, and I get off the phone, I'm like, and through this process I've met people from all walks of life. It's like, the big CEO who came from, wealthy family and roadmap was laid out for him, to the, football hooligan who was an ex-gangster, and who, the people I've had sat across the table from me, telling me their stories is just like, it's unbelievable, quite frankly. And the stories that I've kind of got to hear before anybody else has got to hear them. And so to me, that's like the bit that I enjoy the most about this. And I think that's often why when people say, a lot of other publishing companies, I don't want to tar everybody with that brush, but they're kind of just looking for that, oh yeah, we can make a book, quick buck, here we go, make the book, get it out there. But for me, I just enjoy it. I love talking to people. I love hearing their stories. And often we talk to people, we give them advice, and, sometimes we work with them, sometimes we don't, but either way, it's always interesting. So yeah.
Yeah, well, good for you. Keep following in those footsteps of the likes of like Maya Angelou and, the Dalai Lama, and the people who just do things like forever, not because they finally hit a perfect point, So that's pretty cool. That is the art of business right there. That's for sure. So I always ask some rapid fire theme questions that creates my through line for when I make a book called The First 100 Episodes or something. But I love asking these same theme questions to every one of the guests. Before I do, are there any final thoughts or things that if we move on, you'd feel like you had wanted to mention?
No, I think the only thing actually that suddenly popped to mind is talking about hiring and who we like recruit here. And the one thing I always ask them is I'm like, what do you think you'll enjoy most about working here? And when people say talking with the authors, that's when I kind of like my ears prick up and I go, okay, yeah, you could be a good fit here, because that's what's most important. So yeah, that was something that just came to mind.
Yeah, that's special. That's cool. A great value to have within the company. The first one is something that you yourself are learning right now, and it may be on topic or just completely off topic.
Yeah, so I've actually signed up to a course. So this goes on with like writing. I'm always trying to improve my writing and like learn from different people. So I signed up to a course recently with he is Ali Abdul's scriptwriter. So Ali Abdul's like a big YouTuber. I think he's closing on about 5 million subscribers. And he's written a lot of his videos. I think he has 2 or 3 script writers or something like that. But George is one of them. I always kind of like message back and forth with George here and there over the time. And yeah, I'm excited. So I'm always trying to learn and get better at stuff. So yeah, that's what I'm learning, is kind of a little bit more around the art of writing for YouTube, which is a little bit different.
If you could only leave one piece of advice for the next generation, what would that be?
Oh, that's a good one. I think I would say for the next generation. So this came up the other day. So I was talking with my sister, and she did she did a creative degree, so she did a photography degree, and she didn't get very good marks at the end of her photography degree. She was like predicted to get a first, but she only then ended up getting like a 2-2, and she was really disappointed. And in all honesty, she's really let this like hold her back in life for quite a long time. She always is like, oh, I can't really do creative stuff. And she let this one bad experience, and ultimately with photography, it's subjective, right? So she let, this one kind of judge, I suppose, or impact her. And I said, and I reminded her of this. We had this conversation this weekend. Is I said, like, don't ever let just one person's opinion of what you're capable of impact what you end up doing, because I had people as well when I first started, and they were kind of like, you're going to make a publishing company, like what? And there were times where I nearly listened. I nearly kind of went, and when I first started it, I was working out of my parents' spare bedroom, and people were kind of like, oh man, like, what is this? It's a bit of a joke. You're still working out your parents' bedroom, but so yeah, my best advice to like young people is just, if you believe you can do something, like, listen to what other people say to you or criticize. Obviously take constructive feedback, but yeah, just focus on what it is that you really enjoy, and don't let other people like impact you or put you off.
Yeah, that's beautiful. When I was speaking with a guest yesterday, and he asked me what my advice to people wanting to pursue creative fields would be. And I said, it's a weird one, but I wanted it to be tangible. And I said, find somebody who believes in what you want to pursue right away from the first day, because there's going to be a lot of people that don't believe in you, and you need to be able to tap into the person or people who does. And when you shared that story of your sister, of course, I've, to my knowledge, never met her. That'd be quite random, but probably never met her. Don't know who she is. And like that hit me deep in my heart, because I was like, oh, I wish I talked to her when she got that grade, or was able to, because that happens all the time. I had someone just today ask me what I thought of their painting, and just yesterday asked me what I thought of their photos. And I was like, I'm not going to give you a thumbs up or thumbs down if that's what you're asking for, because it's art. And that's what artists need to lean on. Well, I've really appreciated this. The third question that I always ask people is not a question, because I give them the microphone and allow you an opportunity, like whether these topics or something else, what would be something that you would ask me?
Yeah, I think I've always been curious about a podcast, and a lot of people talk about how challenging it can be to grow a podcast. So my question for you is, if I decided tomorrow I'm going to have a go at a podcast, what would be your tip? What should be my first steps?
Yeah, so I have a few thoughts, and what's so fun about this is if we become mutual supporters and friends from here on out, you can just give me a call anytime, because I've done that now for a lot of people, even 10 minutes, 30 minutes here and there. I've learned from a lot of mentors that the idea of creating solo episodes is something that I probably should have done earlier on. If you look back in my archives, all I did was an interview-based show. I learned from Joe Rogan, The Art of Manliness, Dax Shepard. Like, these were the shows that I knew. You hop on a call like this, you talk about life and their expertise, and you have an audience that can learn from that, but mostly it's about edutainment. And so I was very stubbornly being like, that is what a podcast is by definition to me, so that's what I'm going to create. And I didn't want to confuse things with the audience. But the cool thing that I've learned about podcasting that's different than, let's say, YouTube, is that with the RSS feed and the distribution, it's much less that you're trying to build quality and a niche understanding of what you do with a particular audience on your channel. Like on YouTube, I would not want to publish certain videos because I think it's going to ruin the reach of the next video because it's kind of off topic or it's confusing. With podcasts, what's super cool is John Lee Dumas and David Meltzer told me to start publishing solo episodes. I waited over a year from when they told me that, and 2 years from when the other person told me that. And the first solo episode I did had 3,000 plays the first day that I published it. And in terms of numbers for my show at that time, that was huge. And it was me for 8 minutes talking about how Ed Sheeran wasn't actually good at singing when he first started. It was the easiest episode I had ever made, and it was immediately overnight the most listened and watched, whatever. So I say that to say that when people are thinking of doing it, but they don't want to add too much more to their plate, then I would go do some design thinking, empathy building by looking at some really good solo podcasters, because there are a lot that just crush it without doing interviews. And then they sprinkle in the interviews as opposed to what I ended up doing, which was the reverse. The other thing too, that I think everybody should have a podcast. I tweeted this before and shared it in Instagram story. And then a lot of people followed up with me to be like, what do you mean? Like, there's too many podcasts. And I'm like, no. I'd have to look up the actual title to make sure I'm not getting it wrong. But there's a woman whose content that I follow who created her whole podcast. It's like 60 episodes. She did it in 2017, and it's how to go from, I don't have an idea about a business, but I want to become an entrepreneur, to like crushing it as a business owner. It's 60 episodes. She's never uploaded another one since 2018. But because it was so exactly how you described the process of creating a book, it was so packaged in a way that was bingeable. And she uploaded all 60 in a row. And then that's been that archives. I'm sure it's like at the top of search and stuff when people look for solo podcast episodes or how to start a business podcast. And she probably could create an episode if she wanted to, but she probably doesn't need to anymore because that was like a book to her. And if she went to create another one, she'd probably create a different show or something. So my main advice would be, it's definitely a lot more work than people think unless everything's outsourced. So similar to the publishing process and consults, if you have the money to have it edited and all of these different elements of the show fully automated, then maybe it's different. But as like a pure startup thing, it's so much easier to find a way to own the content from brainstorming to completion than doing an interview show. The interview element adds a ton. And the other thing that I've learned the hard way was trying to compete with shows like Impulsive and making sure that I had a strong video component. I feel like if your show were to be in publishing, that it would be something that people like myself thinking of writing my first book or whatever wouldn't necessarily need to see the people's faces. I would probably listen to it on a walk or in my car and stay a little bit true to the original idea of a podcast where it's audio. And so for me, I had a point where I went back and forth, like I was trying to do too much. And once I went back to it essentially being an audio show, but having the video just for possible marketing material, the show started to take off again and the community was building again and stuff like that. I've written probably 200,000 words about how to start a podcast in a document. So that's my like 3-minute version of it.
Yeah. Wow, that's really interesting. I never would have thought about solo podcasting, so that's a really interesting insight. Yeah, that's really cool. I hadn't thought about that at all.
Yeah, I mean, like, hey, have you ever thought of publishing a book? Here's how you do it. And then broken up into 20 or 80 or 100 episodes, I think would be a pretty cool way to start a show. In between there, bonus episode, I'm interviewing this author, or I'm interviewing someone from this part of our team who specializes in cover design or something. But again, I don't know the niche. And to be honest, to do a fair job of being fully supported. Today's guest is an expert in ghostwriting, publishing, and helping creatives turn their stories into successful books. I've personally watched him help people build incredible children's books, nonfiction and fiction authors alike. He's the founder of Publishing Push, a company that's helped over 4,000 authors bring their big ideas to life. And his unique approach to ghostwriting is all about truly capturing someone's voice and turning it into a seamless, engaging story, a narrative that their audience can connect with. Throughout the episode, we talk about the ghostwriting process, the power of storytelling, and how aspiring authors can successfully navigate the world of self-publishing, hybrid publishing, or more traditional professional publishing. And he shares valuable insights on building your book in a way that will stand out in today's crowded market, the importance of hiring editing help, and how to craft a story that truly resonates. Please welcome to JKL, Patrick, the publishing guy. It's truly incredible seeing the impact that he has on people who want to become authors when they really realize their dreams. Please welcome to JKL, Patrick Walsh, aka the publishing guy at Publishing Push. Please welcome to JKL, Patrick Walsh, aka the publishing guy. JKL listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. We are having an absolute blast bringing these amazing conversations to you. And honestly, every single episode, it kind of gives me chills just thinking about it right now. It feels like it's getting better and better. Please do consider sharing the episode with friends or family, anyone that you think in this case might want to write a book or are looking into building their own creative business. And if you have a moment, leaving a rating or review really does JKL listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. I feel every episode, the conversations get better and better, and it's your feedback that really helps keep us going. So I really appreciate it, but I do feel like we're just getting started. Please do consider sharing the episode with friends or family. Anyone who's, in this case, thinking about writing a book or starting their own creative business, I'm sure will find it valuable. And if you have a moment, just please do leave a rating or review. It really helps grow the show, helps spread the word, and it means the world when you take the time to do so. So thank you so much. A huge thanks today specifically to Patrick for joining us. His work with Publishing Push, his passion for storytelling, and the value he brings by helping authors navigate this difficult world of publishing is truly inspiring. As always, we love hearing from you. If you have any ideas for future guests, topics, or things that you'd like us to share, feel free, hit us up in the DMs, email, comments, whatever's best for you. We're building this community together. Until next time, all the best, and remember, just keep learning.